the afternoon sun cut through the dusty blinds of the Brass Anchor Diner in downtown Baltimore at exactly 1:43 p.m. Thin stripes of light stretched across the worn black and white floor tiles. The lunch rush had faded 30 minutes earlier, leaving behind half-empty coffee mugs, the smell of grilled onions, and the quiet hum of an aging refrigerator that had somehow survived 3 presidential administrations. Elias Thorne stood behind the mahogany counter with a white towel draped over his shoulder. At 62 years old, he moved slower than he used to, but nobody would have called him lazy. Every movement had purpose. Every coffee refill, every plate served, every dollar counted. The Brass Anchor had been his life for 29 years. Now it was slipping away. The sharp crack of paper hitting wood echoed through the diner. Marcus Vance had just slapped another document onto the register. Not because it was necessary, because he enjoyed it. "Final notice," Marcus said, straightening the cuff of his expensive Navy suit. "I figured I'd make sure you actually saw this one." Elias looked down at the paperwork. The amount printed in bold letters hadn't changed. 18,452.50. The number might as well have been a million. He folded the paper carefully. Marcus laughed. Not loudly, just enough. The kind of laugh that suggested someone else's problem was the highlight of his afternoon. "You know what's funny?" Marcus asked. Nobody answered. 3 employees stood near the kitchen entrance, pretending to organize supplies while listening to every word. Marcus continued anyway. "People always think effort changes math." Elias remained silent. "I mean, look at this place." Marcus slowly turned in a circle. "The diner loses money. The equipment is ancient. The building fails inspection. Yet somehow you convinced yourself hard work would save it." His smile widened. "That's adorable." One of the cooks clenched his jaw. Another looked away. Elias simply folded the notice again and placed it beside the register. That seemed to irritate Marcus even more. Most people argued, most people begged, most people got angry. Elias did none of those things. He reached for a coffee pot and quietly topped off a customer's mug. The customer nodded. Life went on, at least for the moment. Marcus stepped closer. "You understand what happens tonight, right?" Elias finally looked up. "I understand. Good." Marcus pointed toward the front door. "By sunset, I expect the keys." A long silence settled between them. Outside, traffic rolled past on Pratt Street. Inside, nobody moved. Marcus leaned against the counter. "You could make this easier on yourself." Elias raised an eyebrow. "How?" "Stop acting like you're some kind of neighborhood hero." Marcus spread his hands dramatically. "This isn't a movie." Nobody laughed. His smile faded slightly. "Businesses fail every day." Elias glanced around the diner, at the photographs hanging on the walls, at the faded newspaper clippings, at the customers who had been coming there for years, at the old jukebox near the entrance that hadn't worked since 2017, but nobody wanted removed. Then he looked back at Marcus. "Maybe." The developer smirked. "There you go, but some places matter." Marcus rolled his eyes. "There it is, what?" "The speech." Marcus pointed toward the room. "The community speech." He lowered his voice. "The family speech." Another step closer. "The dignity speech." He tapped the counter. "Nobody cares." The words landed harder than he expected. Not because they were true, because they revealed exactly who he was. One of the waitresses quietly shook her head. Marcus noticed. "Something funny?" She immediately looked away. "Didn't think so." The silence returned. An older customer near the window slowly folded his newspaper. Another customer set down her fork. The atmosphere felt heavier with every passing second. Marcus seemed to enjoy it. Some people collected baseball cards. Marcus collected moments of control. He checked his watch. A silver luxury model worth more than Elias's monthly payroll. "Actually," Marcus said, "I have another meeting in 40 minutes." He straightened his jacket. "So let's save time." His smile returned. "Just give me the keys now." Several heads turned toward Elias. Nobody breathed. Elias placed both hands on the counter. The wood had scratches from decades of service. Coffee stains, tiny burn marks. Memories, his entire adult life sat inside those imperfections. "No," the answer came quietly. Marcus blinked. "No," the developer laughed again, this time louder. "Oh, that's fantastic." He looked around the diner. Did everyone hear that? Nobody responded. Marcus pointed at Elias. "The man thinks he still has leverage." Elias said nothing. Marcus leaned forward. "You owe the fine." Silence. City cited the property. Silence. The paperwork is finished. Silence. The decision is final. Elias met his eyes. So? For the first time all afternoon, Marcus looked genuinely annoyed. The old man wasn't playing the role. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't collapsing. He wasn't giving Marcus the victory speech he'd imagined on the drive over. Instead, Elias simply stood there, tired, stubborn, unmoved. The developer opened his mouth to speak again. Then the heavy oak door creaked open. Every head in the diner turned. The late afternoon sunlight poured through the entrance. A massive figure stepped inside. The man wore a faded gray hoodie, worn jeans, and work boots that looked large enough to have their own zip code. He paused just inside the doorway, not dramatic, not theatrical, just a man looking for a place to sit. The room suddenly felt smaller. Marcus glanced over his shoulder. The stranger paid absolutely no attention to him. No attention to the argument. No attention to the eviction notice. No attention to the tension hanging over the diner. He simply scanned the room like someone who had spent a very long day traveling and wanted a decent meal. Then he started walking toward the darkest booth in the corner. The floor creaked beneath each step. Marcus frowned. Something about the man felt familiar. He couldn't place it. Not yet. The stranger slid into the booth without saying a word. A waitress instinctively grabbed a menu. The giant nodded politely. And while Marcus Vance continued believing, he controlled everything inside the brass-anchored diner, the most important person in the building had just quietly taken a seat. Have you ever seen someone treat another person like they were worthless, only to realize they picked the wrong target entirely? Comment below, and if you enjoy stories about dignity, respect, and second chances, subscribe to the channel for more. The giant settled deeper into the corner booth and opened the menu without looking up. The diner slowly exhaled. For a brief moment, the attention had shifted away from Marcus Vance. He hated that. People like Marcus treated attention the way some people treated oxygen. The second they lost it, they started reaching for more. He turned back toward Elias. Let's continue. The old diner owner said nothing. Marcus smiled. Actually, let's make sure everyone understands exactly what's happening here. Several employees immediately lowered their eyes. That was his favorite audience. People who couldn't leave. People who couldn't fight back. People who needed their paycheck too badly to walk away. Marcus picked up the eviction notice from the register and waved it like a prize. This isn't personal. Nobody believed him. It's compliance. Still nobody spoke. Marcus cleared his throat dramatically. According to Baltimore City Ordinance 404, B, subsection 3, the ventilation system in this establishment has failed mandatory safety requirements. He tapped the paper, meaning this building officially qualifies as a public hazard. Sarah stopped stacking coffee cups. Marcus noticed immediately. He pointed toward her. You, the 34-year-old woman, froze. What's your name again? Sarah already knew where this was going. Sarah. Marcus snapped his fingers. Right, Sarah. He smiled the way people smiled before delivering an insult disguised as a compliment. You work here because Elias believes in second chances. Correct? The room grew quiet. Elias immediately stepped forward. Leave her out of this. Marcus ignored him. Sarah folded her arms. I work here because I'm good at my job. The answer surprised him for half a second. Then he laughed. Oh, absolutely. Nobody else laughed. Marcus continued. I just think it's interesting. He slowly paced across the diner floor. This place has become some kind of shelter for people nobody else wants. The words hung in the air. Sarah's jaw tightened. A dishwasher near the kitchen doorway stared at the floor. Another employee quietly turned away. Marcus kept walking. Ex-cons, step. People with records, step. People who can't pass background checks, step. People employers won't touch. He spread his arms, and somehow that's supposed to make this diner noble. The silence became uncomfortable, even for some customers. An older man sitting near the window removed his reading glasses. A woman eating stopped halfway through a spoonful. Nobody liked what they were hearing, but Marcus seemed energized by it. You know what I think? Nobody answered. I think Baltimore already has enough problems. He pointed toward the ceiling. And now we're pretending outdated buildings and bad business decisions are acts of charity. Sarah took one step forward. Elias gently raised a hand. Not yet. She stopped. Marcus smirked. You see? He pointed at Sarah again. That right there. His voice sharpened. That's exactly why investors don't want to touch neighborhoods like this. The statement landed hard. not because it was true, because it revealed the way he viewed people. Everything was an asset, a liability, a calculation, nothing more. So Sarah stared directly at him. Investors aren't the only people who matter. Marcus chuckled. Actually, they're usually the people paying the bills. Several customers exchanged looks. The giant in the corner booth turned a page in the menu. Nothing else. No reaction. No interest. At least that's what it appeared to be. A waitress approached his table. "What can I get you, sir?" The man glanced at the menu. Meatloaf. His voice was deep enough to vibrate the salt shaker. The waitress blinked. "Mashed potatoes? Please, anything to drink?" "Sweet tea." "Coming right up." The giant nodded politely. The entire exchange lasted less than 20 seconds. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his performance. He walked toward the counter again. "Elias, let's be honest." The older man remained calm. Marcus tapped the notice. "This place is finished." No response. "You owe $18,452.50. Nothing. The city cited the property. Nothing. The ventilation system hasn't met standards in years. Still nothing." Marcus leaned forward. "And the property happens to sit exactly where my company's new parking garage needs to go." There it was. The truth. A few customers exchanged knowing looks. Marcus immediately realized what he'd revealed. "Too late." Sarah smiled slightly. "Funny how that works." The developer frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" She shrugged. "It means you're talking a lot about public safety." The smile disappeared. "But somehow your parking garage keeps showing up in every sentence." A customer near the window laughed, just once. Marcus shot him a look. The customer went back to his coffee. The developer's face reddened. Not much, just enough. For the first time all afternoon, he wasn't completely in control. He hated that even more. Marcus walked behind a nearby table and grabbed a city planning brochure from a display rack. He flipped it open. "You people think this is about greed." He pointed at a rendering. "Luxury apartments, retail spaces, a modern parking structure. This is progress." Sarah glanced at the picture, then around the diner. At the cook preparing burgers, at the waitress refilling coffee, at the regular customers who knew each other by name. "Looks expensive." Marcus smiled. "Exactly." Sarah nodded. "And where do people like us go?" That question landed harder than anything else she'd said. Because Marcus didn't have an answer. Or maybe he did. He just couldn't say it out loud. The room sat in silence. Even the kitchen seemed quieter. A timer beeped somewhere in the back. Nobody moved. Marcus finally adjusted his tie. "I didn't come here to debate philosophy." He looked directly at Elias. "You have until sunset." The old man stood behind the counter without flinching. Marcus pointed toward the keys hanging beside the register. "After that, they're mine." The developer turned toward the exit, then paused. The giant's food arrived. A plate of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, sweet tea. The enormous man thanked the waitress and quietly began eating. Marcus glanced at him again. Something still felt familiar. The size, the voice, the face hidden beneath the hood. For a brief moment, curiosity replaced arrogance. Then his phone buzzed. The spell broke. He checked the screen and smirked. Whatever message he received seemed to restore his confidence instantly. Marcus slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Enjoy your last afternoon, Elias." He started walking toward the door, but before he reached it, he stopped and looked back one final time. The giant in the corner had not looked up once. Not during the insults, not during the threats, not during the argument. He just kept eating his meal in complete silence. And somehow that silence bothered Marcus far more than any protest ever could. And somehow that silence bothered Marcus far more than any protest ever could. The developer lingered near the front door for another few seconds before turning around again. Apparently, leaving without the final word wasn't an option. Elias wasn't surprised. Men like Marcus often treated conversations like boxing matches. They didn't walk away until they believed everyone had seen them win. The old diner owner grabbed the plate waiting beneath the heat lamp. Fresh meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, exactly the way the customer had ordered it. He carried it carefully across the diner. A slight tremor ran through his right hand. Age had introduced itself years ago and never left. Still, he refused to let the plate shake. When he reached the corner booth, he offered a small, apologetic smile. "Sorry about all the noise." The giant looked up. "No problem." Elias placed the meal on the table. "Usually quieter around here." A faint grin appeared. "It doesn't seem like it today." "Definitely not today." The old man started to turn away. Then the customer reached up and slowly pulled back his hood. Elias froze. For a second, his brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. Then recognition arrived all at once. The face was impossible to mistake. Millions of people knew it. Television viewers, basketball fans, business owners, charity organizations, almost anyone with access to a television during the last 30 years. Yet sitting in the booth didn't look like a celebrity. He looked tired. Not miserable, just exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that came from airports, interviews, meetings, travel schedules, and too many people needing something from you every hour of every day. For the first time all afternoon, Elias forgot about Marcus. "You're," the giant smiled politely, "just trying to eat lunch." Elias laughed despite everything. A real laugh, short, unexpected, needed. The giant extended a hand. Shaq, as if introducing himself was necessary. Elias shook it. His entire hand disappeared. "Elias, nice to meet you. You too." The old man glanced around instinctively. Nobody else had noticed it yet. The booth sat deep in the shadows near the back corner. Most customers remained focused on Marcus and his ongoing performance. Elias lowered his voice. "I appreciate you keeping things low-key." Shaq looked down at the meatloaf. "I appreciate people who can still make real meatloaf." That earned another laugh. Then Elias headed back toward the counter. The brief interaction left him oddly calmer. Not hopeful, just calmer. Meanwhile, Marcus had apparently decided the audience wasn't paying enough attention. He raised his voice again. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about what happens next." Several customers groaned quietly. The developer ignored them. He marched toward a wall covered with old photographs, black and white pictures, little league teams, firefighters, neighborhood events, decades of local history. Marcus pointed at them. "Most of this stuff is probably headed for storage." Elias stopped walking. Sarah looked up from refilling ketchup bottles. Marcus continued. "The city may even classify some of these fixtures as unsanitary." He pointed toward the antique pie display case near the entrance. "That thing definitely goes." Then toward the vintage cash register. That too. Then the jukebox. "Honestly, I'm amazed that thing hasn't exploded." One customer muttered something under his breath. Marcus pretended not to hear it. He enjoyed talking when nobody could stop him. "Once demolition begins, sanitation will probably remove half of this junk anyway." Junk. The word landed badly, because everybody in the diner knew what those items really were. The pie case had belonged to Elias's father. The register had survived 3 ownership changes before Elias bought the diner. The jukebox had played songs during weddings, retirement parties, and countless celebrations. They weren't junk, they were memories. Marcus saw objects. Everyone else saw history. Sarah finally stepped forward. "You ever keep anything longer than 6 months?" The question drew a few smiles. Marcus rolled his eyes. "I keep things that create value. Like parking garages?" A customer chuckled. Marcus shot him a look. The chuckle immediately stopped. Back in the corner booth, Shaq quietly cut another piece of meatloaf. He listened without appearing to listen. Years of fame had taught him something useful. People revealed themselves when they believed nobody important was paying attention. Marcus was revealing plenty. The developer walked behind the counter without permission. That immediately caught Shaq's attention. Elias noticed too. "So now we're trespassing?" Marcus ignored the comment. He grabbed an inspection report from the counter. Worn flooring, he tossed it down. Outdated ventilation. Another toss. Electrical concerns. Another. Fire code recommendations. Paper scattered across the surface. Marcus smiled. "You know what all this says to me?" Nobody answered. "It says somebody should have retired years ago." The words hit harder than the rest, not because they attacked the business, because they attacked the man. Elias stood quietly. For a moment, even Sarah didn't know what to say. Marcus mistook the silence for surrender. Big mistake. He kept talking. "My father always told me something nobody asked. If a building can't keep up with the future, tear it down." Shaq took a sip of sweet tea, still silent, still watching. Marcus continued pacing. "That's how progress works." One elderly customer folded his newspaper. "No!" Marcus turned. The man pointed around the diner. "That's how shortcuts work." A few heads nodded. The customer wasn't angry, just honest. Marcus laughed. "Well, thankfully, city planning isn't decided by nostalgia." The older man smiled. "And thankfully, character isn't decided by money." The diner fell quiet again. This time the silence felt different. Marcus had money. Everyone knew it. But at that moment he looked smaller than before. Not physically, something else. Something harder to measure. Across the room, Shaq finished the last bite of meatloaf. He set down his fork. The plate sat empty. Every bite gone. The waitress approached. "Everything okay?" Shaq nodded. "Best meal I've had all week." The compliment reached the kitchen. Several employees smiled. Even Elias smiled. For a few seconds, the tension eased. Then Marcus checked his watch. The smile returned. The wrong smile. The one everyone was beginning to hate. Enjoy the compliments while you can. He pointed toward the windows. Tomorrow morning, this place starts disappearing. Nobody answered. Marcus seemed satisfied with that. He straightened his jacket, adjusted his tie, prepared to leave. But before he reached the door, he glanced one more time toward the corner booth. The giant was sitting quietly with an empty plate and a glass of sweet tea. Nothing about him suggested involvement. Nothing about him suggested conflict. Nothing about him suggested what was coming. And that was exactly why Marcus never saw the danger sitting 20 feet away. And that was exactly why Marcus never saw the danger sitting 20 feet away. He saw an oversized customer, nothing more. The developer turned away from the corner booth and checked his watch again. 2:11 p.m. His smile widened. He looked like a man who believed the future already belonged to him. "Well," Marcus announced, clapping his hands once, "I think we've all had enough nostalgia for one afternoon." Nobody responded. The customers were tired of him. The staff were exhausted by him. Even the silence seemed tired of him. Marcus walked back toward the counter. Elias remained behind it. The old man had spent nearly 3 decades serving coffee, breakfasts, and late-night meals from that exact spot. Now he stood there watching someone treat his life's work like a real estate spreadsheet. Marcus reached across the counter. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked. The developer ignored her. His hand grabbed the cord connected to the vintage cash register. Elias immediately stepped forward. "Marcus, too late." The developer yanked the plug from the wall. The old register instantly went dark. The familiar hum disappeared. The screen went blank. The receipt printer stopped. The diner fell silent. For a moment nobody moved. The action wasn't necessary. It wasn't required by city ordinance. It wasn't part of any inspection process. Marcus simply wanted everyone to understand that he could do it. That was the point. Control. The dishwasher near the kitchen cursed under his breath. A waitress stared in disbelief. Sarah looked ready to throw something. Marcus casually dropped the power cord onto the counter. There. Elias stared at the dead register. "Why?" Marcus shrugged. "Business is effectively over." The answer sent a ripple through the room. Several customers immediately exchanged looks. A few still had meals coming. Others hadn't paid yet. Nobody knew whether to leave or stay. Marcus didn't care. As of this moment, he continued, "I see no reason for this establishment to continue operating today." Sarah stepped forward. "You don't have that authority." Marcus smiled. "I have enough." "No, you don't." The developer leaned against the counter. "Would you like me to start making phone calls?" Nobody answered. Marcus pulled out his phone. "Because I can call sanitation." He raised one finger. "Health inspectors." A second finger. "Building enforcement." A third. "Fire compliance." A fourth. He smiled. "We can turn this afternoon into a very long afternoon." The threat landed exactly as intended. Fear spread through the room. Not dramatic fear. Practical fear. Rent, grocery fear, utility bill fear. The kind adults understood all too well. Sarah looked toward the kitchen. 3 employees stood frozen. One of them had started only 6 weeks earlier. Another was working a second job at night. The dishwasher was helping support his elderly mother. This wasn't just a diner. It was paychecks. Marcus knew it. That was why he targeted it. He glanced around the room. Actually, while we're discussing schedules, his grin returned. "The demolition crew is already booked." Elias frowned. "What demolition crew?" Marcus opened a folder. The answer was waiting. North Harbor Contracting. He flipped a page. Scheduled arrival. Another page. 6 a.m. tomorrow. The room seemed to stop breathing. Even customers looked shocked. Sarah shook her head, serious. "Oh, I'm extremely serious." Marcus tapped the paperwork. "They're expensive." Another tap. "Had to reserve them weeks ago." Sarah understood immediately. The decision had already been made. Long before today's conversation. Long before the inspections. Long before the threats. Marcus hadn't come to negotiate. He had come to collect. The realization made her stomach turn. Across the diner, Shaq quietly lifted another forkful of food. Still listening, still silent, Marcus looked directly at Elias. "I'll even save you some trouble." He pointed toward the wall of photographs. "Take whatever sentimental stuff you want tonight. Then the pie display, that too. Then the jukebox. If anyone can figure out how to move it without it falling apart." Customer muttered, "Unbelievable." Marcus heard him. This time, he didn't care. Victory made him reckless. Elias slowly removed his glasses. He rubbed his eyes. For the first time all afternoon, he looked every bit of 62. Not weak, just tired. The kind of tired that came from carrying responsibility for too many years. He folded the glasses and placed them on the counter. Then he looked directly at Marcus. "Give me 3 days." The room fell quiet. Marcus blinked. 3 days. 3. The old man nodded. "I found a lender." Marcus laughed immediately. Of course he did. Elias continued anyway. "It's a terrible loan." More laughter. "High interest." Marcus nearly doubled over. "Probably the worst financial decision I've ever considered." Now several customers were staring at the developer instead of Elias. The laughter sounded ugly. Elias kept speaking. "I can have the money." Marcus wiped his eye. Apparently this was entertaining, for I can cover the 18,452.50. The old man's voice remained steady. "I just need 72 hours. Marcus finally stopped laughing. The smile stayed. But now, one word, nothing else. Elias stared at him. "No? No, why?" Marcus shrugged. "Because the truth sounded ridiculous when spoken out loud. Because parking garages made money. Because diners didn't. Because compassion wasn't listed in corporate planning documents. Because he'd already decided. Pick any reason." Marcus simply chose the shortest answer. No. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. The customers couldn't either. 3 days. Not 3 months. Not 3 years. 3 days. The request felt reasonable, which made Marcus's response feel even worse. The developer leaned forward. "You know what your problem is, Elias? Nobody wanted the answer." Marcus gave it anyway. "You think effort earns mercy." The old man remained silent. Marcus smiled. "The world doesn't work that way." Then he pointed toward the door. "The world rewards winners." The statement hung in the air. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then a metallic clink echoed softly through the diner. Tiny, almost unnoticed, except it wasn't. Every eye slowly shifted toward the corner booth. Shaq had just placed his fork on the plate. The meal was unfinished. For the first time since arriving, he wasn't eating anymore. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't moving. He was simply staring at the table in front of him. But something had changed. The relaxed traveler was gone. And for reasons Marcus couldn't yet understand, the sudden silence from the biggest man in the room felt far more dangerous than all the shouting that had come before. And for reasons Marcus couldn't yet understand, the sudden silence from the biggest man in the room felt far more dangerous than all the shouting that had come before. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The entire diner seemed to focus on the unfinished plate sitting in the corner booth. Then came the sound. A long scrape of wood against tile. The chair slid backward across the black and white floor. Every head turned. The giant stood up, slowly, deliberately. At first, Marcus didn't react. Then the man kept rising and rising. By the time he reached his full height, the developer looked noticeably smaller. The diner suddenly felt built for ordinary people again. Several customers exchanged glances. One of the waitresses quietly whispered something under her breath. Nobody could blame her. 7'1" was hard to ignore. The giant reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded napkin. He calmly wiped his hands. No anger, no dramatic gestures, no threats. That somehow made it more intimidating. Marcus forced a smile. "Can I help you?" The giant started walking. One step, then another. The old floor creaked beneath his boots. The distance between the booth and the counter wasn't far, yet every step seemed to stretch the moment longer. Marcus felt it. The customers felt it. Sarah found herself holding her breath. The giant finally stopped in front of the counter. His shadow fell directly across Marcus. The developer instinctively took half a step backward, then immediately regretted it. Too late. Several people noticed, including Sarah. She almost smiled. Almost. The giant glanced toward Elias, then toward the paperwork, then toward Marcus. When he finally spoke, his voice filled the room without effort. "How much?" Nobody needed clarification. Marcus knew exactly what he meant. Still, he played dumb. "Excuse me?" A pause. How much? Marcus straightened his jacket. 18,452.50. The giant nodded. No reaction, no surprise. No concern, just a simple nod. As in $18,452.50? Marcus frowned. That's correct. The giant looked toward Elias. That's the total? Sighed. That's the total. The giant nodded again. For several seconds he said nothing. Marcus regained some confidence. Good. A customer asking questions. Nothing more. The developer folded his arms. Look, I appreciate the concern, but this is a legal matter. The giant ignored him completely. That irritated Marcus immediately. People like Marcus hated being ignored. The giant looked around the diner, at the customers, at the employees, at the photographs covering the walls, at the pie display, at the old register Marcus had unplugged, then back at Elias. How long have you owned this place? 29 years. The giant glanced toward the photographs again. Long time. Elias nodded. Feels longer on some days. A few customers chuckled, even now. The giant smiled faintly. Marcus interrupted. Listen, we're done here. Nobody acknowledged him. The giant continued, speaking with Elias. You know everybody here? Most of them. Most? Some only come in once. That earned another small laugh. The giant nodded. Then he pointed toward the kitchen. Your employees? Elias looked back. Good people. Sarah lowered her eyes. The dishwasher did the same. Nobody seemed comfortable being discussed. The giant continued. They been here long? Some have. Another glance toward Sarah. Some are rebuilding their lives. Marcus rolled his eyes dramatically. There it was again. The second chances. The community. The dignity. Everything he considered bad business. The giant noticed the reaction. For the first time he looked directly at Marcus. Not through him, not past him, at him. The developer suddenly looked uncomfortable. It lasted only a second, still noticeable. The giant tilted his head slightly. You the owner? Marcus smirked. No. You buying it? Something like that. The answer sounded weaker than Marcus intended. The giant nodded. You own the fine? Marcus hesitated. Technically, my holding company acquired the debt. The giant's expression didn't change. Technically, that's right. Another pause. The giant studied him for a moment. Not aggressively, just carefully. Like somebody reading the back of a cereal box. Marcus hated it. The silence stretched. Finally, the giant spoke again. Interesting, that was all. Just one word. Yet Marcus suddenly felt the need to explain himself, which surprised him. Look, this isn't personal. Nobody in the diner believed that. The giant didn't respond. Marcus kept talking anyway. The property has issues. Silence. The city cited violations. Silence. The redevelopment project creates jobs. Still silence. Marcus shifted his weight. For the first time all afternoon, he sounded like someone defending himself instead of attacking someone else. The giant listened patiently, then asked a simple question. What kind of jobs? Marcus blinked. What? What kind? The developer wasn't expecting that. Construction. The giant nodded. Temporary? Marcus hesitated. Some. Permanent? Some. The giant looked around the diner, then toward the employees, then back at Marcus. How many people work here? The developer didn't know. Of course he didn't know. Sarah knew. Elias knew. The customers probably knew. Marcus didn't. The silence answered for him. The giant nodded slowly. That seemed to bother Marcus even more. The developer quickly looked at his watch, a nervous habit beginning to appear more often. I really don't see why this concerns you. The giant smiled. Not a celebrity smile, not a public appearance smile, a regular smile. The kind one human being gives another. Then he reached up, pulled the hood completely off, and suddenly the room changed. The waitress carrying coffee froze. A customer near the window nearly dropped his cup. The dishwasher's eyes widened. Sarah stared. Elias already knew. Now everyone else knew too. The face from television, from championships, from commercials, from charity events, from decades of public life. Shaquille O'Neal stood beside the counter. The diner went completely silent. Marcus stared. The color slowly drained from his face. Not all at once. Little by little. Like someone realizing they had spent the last 2 hours performing for an audience they never bothered to identify. And for the first time since entering the Brass Anchor Diner, Marcus Vance looked genuinely nervous. And for the first time since entering the Brass Anchor Diner, Marcus Vance looked genuinely nervous. The silence stretched across the diner. Nobody rushed to speak. Nobody needed to. The look on Marcus's face was providing enough entertainment for everyone in the room. A few minutes earlier, he had been pacing around like a man conducting an orchestra. Now he looked like someone who had just realized he was standing on the wrong stage. Still, pride is a stubborn thing, especially when it's been fed for years. Marcus forced a laugh, a bad one, too loud, too quick. Well, he straightened his tie. This is certainly unexpected. Nobody responded. The developer glanced around the diner. Several customers were openly staring at him now. The balance of the room had shifted. He felt it, and he hated it. Marcus quickly grabbed the clipboard from the counter. His confidence returned in small pieces. Paperwork still mattered. Contracts still mattered. Debt still mattered. Fame couldn't change numbers. At least that's what he told himself. He held up the documents. Look, Mr. O'Neill, with all due respect, this isn't some misunderstanding. He tapped the page, 18,452.50. Another tap, outstanding debt. Another, city violations. Another, legal transfer of ownership rights through my holding company. Marcus smiled again, a little too hard. The facts don't care who walks through the door. Several people rolled their eyes. The giant remained calm. Shaq glanced at the paperwork, then at Marcus, then at the old register, then back at the paperwork. His expression never changed. You own the debt? Marcus nodded. My company does. And that's what gives you control? Exactly. The answer came faster than Marcus intended, like a student eager to answer the teacher's question. Shaq nodded. Got it. He reached into his pocket. Marcus expected an argument, a lecture, a celebrity speech, maybe even a checkbook. Instead, Shaq pulled out his phone. That confused everyone. Including Elias, the giant scrolled through his contacts, tapped a number, raised the phone to his ear. Marcus frowned. What are you doing? Shaq ignored him. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then somebody answered. The voice immediately came through the speaker. Shaq? The tone was warm, familiar, professional. The giant smiled slightly. Hey, Tom. Marcus froze. Something about the voice sounded familiar. Very familiar. Too familiar. Shaq leaned against the counter. Sorry to bother you. No bother at all. The voice laughed. I still owe you lunch after today. A few customers exchanged glances. Marcus felt a knot forming in his stomach. Shaq continued. Quick question. Sure. I'm standing inside a diner called the Brass Anchor. A pause. Then the voice answered immediately. Downtown Baltimore? That's the one. Marcus stopped breathing for a second. The knot tightened. Shaq continued. I've got a guy here claiming a ventilation citation under Ordinance 404. B justifies taking over the property. Another pause. Longer this time. Then came a response. What company? Marcus cold. Actually cold. Despite the summer afternoon. Shaq looked at the clipboard. Vance Urban Holdings. The silence on the phone became noticeable. Very noticeable. Then came a sigh. Not the relaxed kind. The kind people make when a problem they've been monitoring suddenly appears in front of them. Oh no. Marcus immediately looked toward the exit. Nobody missed it. Not Sarah. Not Elias. Not the customers. And definitely not Shaq. The voice returned. Please tell me Marcus isn't there. Nobody in the diner moved. Shaq looked directly at the developer standing right next to me. The response came instantly. Put him on speaker. Marcus swallowed. His mouth felt dry. Shaq didn't move the phone. The voice didn't need help reaching him. Marcus, the developer flinched. Everybody saw it. Every single person. The voice belonged to Thomas Gallagher, Baltimore's chief urban planner, Marcus's direct superior, the man who had signed off on every major development project in the city during the last 8 years, the man who could approve projects, delay projects, or destroy projects. The diner watched Marcus's face lose color, slowly. Completely, sir. His voice sounded smaller. Much smaller. What exactly are you doing? Marcus opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Thomas didn't wait. I asked a question. The developer cleared his throat. There are code violations. There are procedures. Marcus said nothing. There are hearings. Nothing. There are review boards. Nothing. There are appeals. Nothing. There are legal channels. Still nothing. Thomas's voice sharpened. So why am I hearing about demolition crews scheduled before final review? Every employee in the diner turned toward Marcus. Sarah's eyes widened. Elias looked stunned. The customers exchanged looks. Marcus had never mentioned that part. Not honestly. Not completely. The silence became painful. Thomas continued. And why am I hearing this from Shaquille O'Neill? Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. Marcus stared at the floor. The developer suddenly looked like a teenager being called into the principal's office. Shaq remained calm, one hand in his pocket. the other holding the phone. Thomas sighed again. Then his tone changed completely. "Shaq, I apologize." The respect in his voice was impossible to miss. "Looks like I need to have a conversation with somebody in my department." "No problem." "Actually, it is a problem." Thomas sounded annoyed now. "Marcus, you're done discussing this property until my office reviews everything personally." Marcus's eyes widened. "Sir." No answer came immediately. "Not another word. You understand me?" Marcus swallowed. "Yes, sir. Good." The chief urban planner paused, then added one final sentence. The sentence that effectively ended everything. "If Mr. O'Neill tells me something doesn't smell right, I pay attention." The diner went completely silent. Marcus stared at Shaq. Not like a developer looking at a customer. Not like a businessman looking at a celebrity. Like a man suddenly realizing he had spent hours kicking a hornet's nest without noticing the hornets. Thomas spoke one final time. "Shaq, call me later." "Will do." The line disconnected. The phone screen went dark. Nobody said a word. Not immediately, there wasn't much left to say. The game Marcus thought he was winning had just collapsed in less than 3 minutes. His demolition crew, his pressure campaign, his intimidation tactics, his carefully planned victory. All of it had just been dragged into the sunlight, and standing in the middle of the brass anchor diner, surrounded by customers, employees, and the very people he'd spent the afternoon humiliating, Marcus Vance finally understood something terrifying. Shaquille O'Neal hadn't even started helping yet. Shaquille O'Neal hadn't even started helping yet. That realization settled over the diner like a heavy weight. Marcus felt it first. The customers felt it second. The employees felt it most of all. For nearly 3 hours, the developer had controlled every conversation in the room. Now he couldn't even control his own breathing. Nobody rushed to celebrate. Nobody clapped. This wasn't a movie. People were still worried. The diner still faced a fine. The building still carried citations. The future still looked uncertain. Marcus understood that too, which was why a little confidence began returning. Slowly, carefully, like a gambler convincing himself the next hand would save him. He adjusted his tie, straightened his shoulders, then looked directly at Shaq. "Fine." The giant raised an eyebrow. Marcus forced a smile. Maybe the review process gets delayed. Nobody missed the change in language. Not stopped, delayed. The developer was already retreating. Maybe my office gets audited. Another retreat, maybe I have some uncomfortable meetings. Another step backward. Then his smile returned. But the property still owes the money. There it was, the last card, the only card he had left. $18,452.52. He tapped the page. "The debt doesn't disappear." Nobody answered. Marcus nodded confidently. "And neither does ownership." The room became quiet. For a moment it sounded reasonable, because technically it was. The fine still existed, the debt still existed, the paperwork still existed. Marcus looked around the diner. Some confidence returned. "You know what happens after all the investigations?" He answered his own question. "The numbers stay the same." He pointed toward Elias. "The debt stays." Another point. "The violations stay." Another. "The property remains vulnerable." Marcus smiled. Eventually reality wins. The customers looked toward Shaq. The employees did too, even Elias. The giant remained calm, no frustration, no anger, just thought. He glanced out the front window, across the street, then toward the neighboring lot visible through the side windows, an empty piece of land surrounded by temporary fencing. Marcus noticed the glance immediately, and suddenly he wished he hadn't. Shaq looked back at him. Question. Marcus swallowed. "What?" "The vacant lot next door." The developer froze just slightly. Enough. Shaq noticed. So did Sarah. The customers noticed too. "Who owns it?" Marcus hesitated. The hesitation told everyone more than the answer. Finally he spoke. "The private seller." Shaq nodded. "You need it?" "No." The answer came too fast, way too fast. Sarah actually laughed. A customer near the counter snorted into his coffee. Marcus immediately regretted the response. Shaq smiled faintly. "You sure?" Marcus said nothing. The giant nodded. "Got it." Then he pulled out his phone again, immediately. No drama, no speech, no warning, just action. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Shaq scrolled through his contacts, tapped a number. The phone rang once, twice, then somebody answered. Mike, the voice sounded energetic, professional, focused. Shaq leaned casually against the counter. "For you never." A few customers exchanged looks. Marcus stared. The giant continued. "I need information." "What kind?" vacant lot next to the Brass Anchor Diner. Pause. Keyboard sounds appeared through the speaker. The person was already searching. A few seconds passed. Then came the response. Corner parcel. More typing. 3,800 square feet. More typing. Owner's been looking to sell for about 7 months. Marcus closed his eyes. Just briefly. That was not a good... Not at all. Shaq continued. Available? Looks like it. Any offers? Another pause. One serious buyer. The diner watched Marcus's face. Nobody blinked. The voice continued. Company called Vance Urban Holdings. Several customers immediately turned toward Marcus. Sarah folded her arms. The dishwasher grinned. For the first time all afternoon, the giant nodded. What happens without that parcel? More typing, then a low whistle. Interesting. What? The garage doesn't work. Marcus looked like someone had been punched. The voice continued. The design loses required access spacing. Another pause. The permit package falls apart. Another pause. The entire development has to be redesigned. Nobody in the diner moved. The silence became almost painful. Then came the final sentence. Whoever owns that lot controls the project. Shaq smiled. Thanks, no problem. The call ended. Marcus stared at the floor. The room stared at Marcus. Nobody needed an explanation anymore. The entire afternoon suddenly made sense. The pressure, the deadlines, the fake urgency, the demolition schedule, the intimidation, the refusal to grant 72 hours. It had never been about safety. It had never been about community improvement. It had been about leverage, pure leverage. Shaq slipped the phone back into his pocket, then pulled it out again. A different contact. Another call. This time the answer came instantly. Good afternoon, Mr. O'Neill, a professional voice, corporate, prepared afternoon. What can we do for you? Shaq looked out the side window, the vacant parcel beside the Brass Anchor. The room became completely silent. I want it. Marcus' head snapped upward. The voice on the phone, remedian that. How fast? Pause. Then offer submitted within the hour. Full asking price. Another pause. Shaq nodded. Add 10%. The voice hesitated. 10% above asking. Marcus looked physically sick. The giant continued. If the owner wants to close today, close today. The voice laughed. Understood. And Mike? Yes, don't negotiate. The entire diner watched Marcus unravel. Thread by thread, piece by piece. The phone call ended. Nobody spoke, not immediately. There wasn't much left to say. Marcus finally found his voice. You can't just legally buy land? Shaq asked. The developer stopped. The giant looked at him calmly. No laws against that. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, nothing. For 3 hours he had weaponized paperwork, deadlines, permits, and ownership structures against people with fewer resources. Now someone had simply used the same system better. No threats, no intimidation, no tricks, just business, the kind Marcus claimed to respect. The giant folded his arms. You said reality wins. The words hit harder than any insult could have. Marcus stared, speechless. Across the diner, Sarah finally smiled. Elias shook his head in disbelief. Several customers quietly laughed. And standing in the middle of the room, surrounded by the very people he had spent the afternoon trying to overpower, Marcus Vance discovered what it felt like when leverage suddenly belonged to someone else. The hunter had become the hunted. The hunter had become the hunted. For several long seconds, nobody in the Brass Anchor Diner said a word. The room simply watched. Marcus Vance stood frozen beside the counter, staring at the floor as if a better outcome might somehow appear between the black and white tiles. It didn't. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. The developer finally looked at the screen. The expression on his face somehow managed to get worse. One call, then another, then an email notification, then a text. Whatever was happening on the other side of those messages clearly wasn't helping his day. Sarah noticed first. Looks busy. A few customers laughed. Marcus didn't. He gathered his clipboard, then the inspection reports, then the demolition schedule, then the permits. The stack of paperwork that had seemed so powerful an hour earlier now looked ridiculous. Just paper. The developer shoved everything into a leather folder. His hands weren't as steady as before. Nobody offered sympathy. Not after what he'd done. Not after the threats. Not after the humiliation. Not after treating people like obstacles instead of human beings. Marcus avoided eye contact with everyone, especially Shaq. The giant remained calm. No victory speech, no public humiliation. That somehow made Marcus look even worse. Finally, the developer headed for the door. Halfway there, he stopped. For a moment, it looked like he wanted to say something. Maybe an apology. Maybe an excuse. Maybe one final argument. Instead, he simply lowered his head and kept walking. The heavy oak door opened, closed, and Marcus Vance disappeared into the Baltimore afternoon. Nobody rushed to celebrate. Nobody cheered. The silence left behind felt too strange for that. For nearly 4 hours, Marcus had filled every corner of the diner with noise. Now he was gone, and the quiet felt almost unbelievable. A coffee cup clinked softly against a saucer. Somebody cleared their throat. The refrigerator hummed again. Life slowly returned. Then Elias sat down. Not in a booth, not at a table, right behind the counter, as if his legs had finally decided they were done carrying him. The old man removed his glasses. His hand shook. Something harder to control. Sarah immediately moved toward him. Elias? I'm all right. He wasn't, at least not completely. The old owner stared at the dead cash register Marcus had unplugged, then at the photographs on the wall, then at the employees standing nearby, the people who had nearly lost their jobs that afternoon, the people he had promised to protect, the people who trusted him. His eyes began to water. He quickly looked away. Too late. Everyone noticed, especially Shaq. The giant walked over slowly. No cameras, no reporters, no social media team. Just one man approaching another. He placed a hand on Elias' shoulder. The old man laughed weakly. That's a very large hand. A few people smiled. Even now, Shaq smiled too. I get that a lot. The joke broke some of the tension. Not all of it. Just enough. Elias rubbed his eyes. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything. The old man shook his head. No. His voice cracked slightly. I do. He looked around the diner, at everything. The walls, the tables, the kitchen, the people. This place should have been gone years ago. Nobody liked hearing that. Especially Sarah, Elias. It's true. The old man sighed. Every year gets harder. His gaze drifted toward the front window. Bills get bigger. A pause. Equipment gets older. Another. Customers have their own struggles. The room remained quiet. Nobody interrupted. For the first time all afternoon, Elias seemed willing to talk honestly. Not as the owner. Not as the leader, just as a tired man. Shaq pulled up a chair beside him. What keeps you doing it? The question surprised everyone, including Elias. The old man looked down for several seconds and he didn't answer. Then he smiled. A sad smile, the kind that carried history. That's a complicated question. I've got time. The answer came gently. Elias stared at the countertop. His fingers traced one of the old scratches in the wood. The diner had suddenly become very quiet. Even the customers listened, because everyone sensed something important was coming. Shaq nodded toward the kitchen. Marcus wasn't wrong about one thing. Several employees frowned. The giant continued, You do hire people other businesses won't? Sarah looked down. The dishwasher did too. A line cook stopped cleaning the grill. Nobody seemed offended. They already knew. The question wasn't whether it was true. The question was why. Shaq leaned back slightly. Most owners wouldn't take that risk. The old man laughed softly. Most owners are smarter than me. A few people chuckled. Then the smile disappeared. The silence returned. Elias looked toward Sarah. The 34-year-old woman immediately understood. He wasn't talking only about her. He was talking about everyone. Every employee who had walked through those doors carrying baggage, records, mistakes, bad decisions, bad luck, lives that had gone sideways. The old man exhaled slowly, then spoke. I wasn't always this generous. Nobody expected that answer. Elias nodded. Truth is, I used to believe exactly what people like Marcus believe. That surprised everyone, even Shaq. The old man continued. I thought people earned what they got. The room remained silent. I thought bad choices deserved consequences. Another pause. I thought second chances were something people talked about, not something they actually gave. Sarah stared. She had never heard this story before. None of them had. The old owner looked toward a framed photograph hanging near the pie display case. A photograph nobody had paid much attention to before. A young man, smiling, standing beside Elias, maybe 27, maybe 28. The old man's eyes locked onto the picture, and suddenly the room felt different. He swallowed hard. Shaq followed his gaze, then looked back at Elias. The giant's voice softened. Who is that? For the first time all afternoon, the old diner owner looked completely defenseless. Not weak, just honest. His eyes never left the photograph, and when he finally answered, Every person in the diner leaned forward slightly, because they knew they were about to hear the real reason the Brass Anchor Diner still existed. My son. My son. The two words settled over the diner more heavily than anything Marcus had said all afternoon. Nobody interrupted. Nobody looked away. Elias kept staring at the photograph hanging near the pie display case. The young man in the picture looked happy, comfortable, the kind of smile people wear when they still believe life is going somewhere good. Shaq followed his gaze. What's his name? The old man swallowed. Daniel. The answer came, quiet. For a moment, Elias seemed unsure whether to continue. Then he looked around the diner, at Sarah, at the dishwasher, at the line cooks, at the customers who had become family over the years. If they were going to understand, they deserved the truth. Daniel was 28 when he died. The room became completely silent. Sarah slowly sat down. Something in Elias's voice told her this wasn't going to be an easy story. The old man rubbed his hands together, a habit he had whenever difficult memories surfaced. He wasn't a bad kid. A small smile appeared. He loved baseball. Another couldn't hit a curveball to save his life. A few people laughed softly. He tried anyway. The smile disappeared, made mistakes, nobody moved, some bad ones. The old man nodded slowly. Wrong people. A pause. Wrong decisions. Another. Wrong place at the wrong time. His eyes drifted back toward the photograph. Daniel's story wasn't unusual. That was part of what made it hurt. Thousands of families could have told a version of the same story. One mistake, then another, until life became harder to fix than anyone expected. Elias continued. He got arrested. Nobody reacted. The employees already understood where this was going. The old man looked down at the counter. He served his time. A long pause followed. When he got out, he wanted to start over. The words caught in his throat. He really did. Sarah closed her eyes, because she knew exactly what came next. She had lived it herself, the applications, the interviews, the promises, the rejection, or an over again. Elias nodded. Toward her. Sarah nodded back. Yeah, the old man sighed. Daniel filled out applications everywhere. A pause. Warehouses, another. Restaurants, another. Construction, another. Delivery jobs. The old man laughed bitterly. At one point, I applied to wash dishes. Smiled. He couldn't even get that. The sight became painful. Shaq sat completely still, listening, not interrupting, not rushing the story. Elias continued. Every interview ended the same way. His fingers tapped the countertop once. They liked him. Another tap. They needed workers. Another. Then they saw the record. The old man's eyes lowered, and suddenly they didn't need workers anymore. Nobody in the diner seemed surprised. That somehow made it worse. Elias looked toward Sarah again, then toward the dishwasher, then toward another cook. Each one understood, because each one carried some version of the same scar. The old owner exhaled slowly. After 2 years of rejection, Daniel stopped believing people. The room remained silent. He stopped believing in himself too. A long pause followed. Then came the part Elias had spent years trying not to think about. He was arrested again. Nobody moved. The old man stared at the photograph. Nothing violent. A pause. Nothing serious. Another. But he violated parole. The old owner swallowed hard. He ended up in county jail. The words barely left his mouth. Sarah looked away. The dishwasher stared at the floor. One of the customers quietly removed his glasses. Elias's voice dropped lower. 3 weeks later, they called me. Nobody needed further explanation, understood. The old man closed his eyes. He died in that jail. Silence. No dramatic music. No speeches. Just silence. The kind silence creates when everybody knows there is nothing useful to say. After a while, Elias opened his eyes again. The official report said cardiac complications. He shrugged. Maybe. A pause. Maybe not. Another. Honestly, it didn't matter anymore. The old man looked around the diner, at every employee, every customer, every face. I kept thinking about one thing. Nobody interrupted. What if somebody had given him a chance? Question hung in the air. Simple, impossible, painful. What if one employer had said yes? What if one manager had looked beyond a record? What if one person had decided a mistake didn't have to become a life sentence? The old man smiled sadly. I'll never know. He pointed toward the kitchen. But I know this. Another pause. Every person working here deserves the chance Daniel never got. Sarah wiped her eyes, quickly, trying not to let anyone notice. The dishwasher wasn't as successful. Neither was one of the cooks. Nobody made fun of them. Not today. Shaq remained quiet for a long moment. His expression never changed. But everyone could tell he was processing every word. Finally, he reached toward the counter. A stack of blank order tickets sat beside the register. The small paper slips customers never paid attention to. He pulled one free, then borrowed a pen. Nobody asked what he was doing. The diner watched. The giant leaned over the counter and began writing. Not quickly, carefully, line by line, occasionally pausing to think. Then writing again. The scratching sound of the pen echoed softly through the room. 30 seconds passed, then 60. Finally, Shaq folded the ticket once and slid it across the counter toward Elias. The old man looked confused. "What is this?" Shaq smiled. "Instructions." Elias unfolded the paper. His eyes moved across the words, then stopped. He read them again. Slower this time. The old man's expression changed completely. Confusion, disbelief, emotion, all at once. Sarah leaned forward. "What is it?" Elias couldn't answer immediately. His eyes were still locked on the ticket. Finally, he looked up at Shaq. The old man seemed genuinely speechless. The giant simply smiled. Not the smile of a celebrity, not the smile of a businessman, the smile of a man making a promise. And for the second time that afternoon, everyone inside the brass-anchored diner realized that what Shaquille O'Neal was about to do had nothing to do with money. And for the second time that afternoon, everyone inside the brass-anchored diner realized that what Shaquille O'Neal was about to do had nothing to do with money. 6 months later, Baltimore woke up to one of the coldest mornings of the year. At exactly 9:17 a.m., a crowd had already gathered outside the brass-anchored diner. Only now the diner looked different. The original building remained exactly where it had always been. The old mahogany counter was still there. The black and white floor tiles were still there. The photographs still covered the walls. Even the stubborn jukebox had survived. Elias had refused to remove it. Some battles weren't worth winning. But next to the diner stood something entirely new. The vacant lot Marcus Vance had fought so desperately to control had been transformed. Not into a parking garage. Not into luxury retail space. Not into another anonymous development project. A new 2-story training facility stood beside the diner. Large windows, modern kitchens, classrooms, office space, interview rooms, everything designed for one purpose: giving people a second chance. A banner stretched across the entrance. The Brass Encore Culini Training Center, funded by the O'Neill Foundation. The sidewalk was packed. Local business owners, city officials, former employees, news crews, community leaders. Even customers who hadn't visited the diner in years had returned. Inside the crowd stood Sarah. She looked different too, not because of new clothes, not because of a new hairstyle, because confidence changes people. 6 months earlier, she had worried about losing her job. Today, she supervised training operations for the entire program. A position she still couldn't quite believe was real. The dishwasher Marcus once dismissed now managed inventory. One former line cook had become a certified instructor. Another employee had completed management training. The ripple effects had spread far beyond one diner. More than 40 adults had already completed the program. Every one of them had faced barriers that made employment difficult: criminal records, recovery histories, long-term unemployment. Life stories many employers preferred not to hear. Now they wore uniforms, held jobs, paid rent, supported families, and walked into work through the front door instead of the back. That mattered more than statistics, more than speeches, more than headlines. At 9:30 sharp, Shaq stepped onto a temporary stage built outside the new facility. The crowd erupted into applause. He waved, smiled, then immediately pointed toward Elias. The applause grew louder, much louder. The old diner owner looked uncomfortable. Public attention had never been his favorite thing. For nearly 3 decades, he had been the man serving coffee, not the man standing on stages. Yet there he was, wearing the same worn watch he'd owned for 15 years, the same practical shoes, the same quiet expression. Some things never changed. A city official approached the microphone. Today isn't about a building. The crowd quieted. It isn't about an investment. Another pause. It isn't even about a program. The official turned toward Elias. It's about a decision. The old man looked confused. The speaker smiled. One person deciding another human being deserves a chance. Several people nodded. Sarah felt her throat tighten. So did many others. Because everyone standing there understood the truth. The training center existed because one man refused to stop believing in people society had already given up on. The ribbon stretched across the entrance, bright blue, freshly cut, waiting. The official handed Elias a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors. The old man laughed. "I've never trusted scissors this expensive." The crowd laughed with him. Even Shaq. The tension eased. Then the official nodded. "Whenever you're ready." Elias looked at the ribbon, then at the crowd, then at the employees standing nearby. Many of them owed him more than a paycheck. Some owed him their future. The old man slowly raised the scissors. His hands trembled slightly. Not from age, not this time. The ribbon fell. The crowd exploded. Applause echoed across the street. People cheered. Some wiped away tears. Others hugged each other. For a moment it felt like the entire neighborhood was celebrating together. But the real surprise waited inside. Shaq gently touched Elias' shoulder. "One more thing." The old man frowned. "What now?" The giant smiled. "Come see." They walked toward the entrance. The crowd followed. Inside the lobby stood a tall, cloth-covered display mounted on the wall. Nobody had mentioned it before, not even Sarah. Elias looked confused. Shaq nodded toward the display. "Go ahead." The old diner owner pulled the cloth away. The room fell silent. A polished brass plaque gleamed beneath the overhead lights. Elias read the words once, then again, then a third time. His knees nearly gave out. Sarah immediately reached for his arm. The plaque read, "The Daniel Thorne Opportunity Initiative dedicated to the memory of a son who deserved a second chance. Say may every life rebuilt here honor the opportunity he never received." Below the inscription appeared a final line. "Founded by the O'Neill Foundation and inspired by the compassion of Elias Thorne." Nobody spoke. Nobody could. The room stood frozen. Elias stared at the plaque. The name, his son's name, not hidden, not forgotten, not buried in paperwork or old memories. Permanent, visible, alive. The old man covered his mouth. Tears finally won. For a long time he couldn't say anything, neither could Sarah, neither could many people standing nearby. Shaq remained beside him quietly. No cameras, no performance, no speech, just respect. Eventually, Elias looked up, his voice barely worked. "You did all this for him?" Shaq shook his head. "No." The old man frowned. The giant smiled gently. "I did it for everybody who comes after him." The room fell silent again because that was the difference. A check could solve a debt. A donation could save a building. But a system that created opportunities could change lives long after everyone in the room was gone. Outside, people continued celebrating. Inside, a father stood before his son's name. And for the first time in many years, Daniel Thorne's story no longer ended inside a county jail at 28 years old. It continued through every person who walked through those doors looking for one more chance. The Brass Anchor Diner survived. The training center flourished. Dozens found work, then hundreds, and eventually many more. Because true power was never about owning property, controlling debt, or forcing people to surrender. True power was helping someone stand back up when the world had already decided they should stay down. That morning, in a small corner of Baltimore, a diner became a legacy, and a legacy was born.